Open University.
Hey class, I know you think of me as probably the world's most well-adjusted, aging, failed pop star, but believe it or not, there was a time when I was unhappy. Actually, it was really the time when I started in the music industry and dropped out of university. It's the only time I've thought of taking therapy of some kind, going into analysis. And luckily, one of Edinburgh's foremost Freudian analysts was living directly below me. I was living in this very strange little apartment in 1981 and 2, which was directly, it was a mezzanine apartment, sort of Kafkaesque place suspended between two flats in the Edinburgh New Town. My dad had separated from my mother. I was at Aberdeen, but I came back down to Edinburgh to start a band. And I had this mezzanine, 7 Ainsley Place, which was, it had a door halfway up the stairs with a sort of oval mirror on it. And the stairways in those Edinburgh Newtown apartments are really Victorian. There's a kind of underwater, subaquatic feel. The light filters down from far, far above, and there are echoing stone staircases, a bit like in Blade Runner, that sort of apartment building. And I lived in this weird thing with beams that were much lower than my head, so I had to keep stooping down, as Thomas Jerome Newton does when he enters his spacecraft, to move around. And there was a little tiny toilet and a sink, some shelves for books, a bed, a rotating Picador bookstand with all the books which were damaging me, wounding me beautifully at the time. And there was a window overlooking the gardens, and strangely enough, symbolically enough, it was overlooking the gardens where I'd grown up, because I'd grown up in the house next door at 6 Ainsley Place. Been living there at the end of the 60s, listening to Beatles records and having fun with my brother and sister in the various lodges we had to take in to pay off the mortgage. But this was a sad reprise of that time. This was the 80s, 20 years later. And not really 20 years, a bit less than that. And one of the things that happened at university, one of the many fatal encounters I had with books there was with a book which I had to go to a special library up at, I think it was called Forest Hill, which it was the psychiatry library for the University of Aberdeen. And I went there to get this book called Schizoid Phenomena, Object Relations and the Self by Harry Guntrip. And I was kind of, you know, you get this thing where if you read dictionaries of symptoms or you read medical texts of any kind, you think, oh my God, that's me, I've got that. This was one of those experiences. I read through this book by Harry Guntrip and thought, Jesus, I am a schizoid. All the things he was describing were things that were either straight out of Franz Kafka, Samuel Beckett, or David Bowie, or with things that I recognized from my own life. David Bowie, who of course was the most glamorous example of the schizoid, so I kind of didn't mind. I almost wanted to be schizoid. Bowie had talked about thinking of himself as a bit of a schizoid. He'd, on his Star Special in 1979, he'd played 20th Century Schizoid Man by King Crimson, Robert Fripp's band, and said he was a schizoid. So of course I had to investigate what those things were. And I'm just going to read a little bit from the Wikipedia page about Harry Guntrip, who wrote that book. He worked extensively with schizoid patients, I think in Leeds at the psychiatric unit of the university there. And these patients were detached, withdrawn, unable to form meaningful human relations. So you have to think of me at the time. I was very detached and withdrawn at university, and you know, there are all these Bowie lines that resonate with this, like Ziggy sucked up into his mind. This is what you're supposed to do at university, but nevertheless it is a kind of maladjusted thing to do. Or else blue, blue, electric blue, that's the colour of my room where I will live. Pale blinds, drawn all day, nothing to read, nothing to say. It's a kind of image, especially in the Low album, which had only just come out at that point, you know, it was relatively recent. There's this image of somebody with a rather beautiful image of withdrawal. And Kretschmer, who actually was a big influence on Harry Guntrip, had said, Kretschmer, this German psychiatrist, said that the schizoid personality was like a house with permanently drawn blinds. So Bowie was thinking about pale blinds drawn all day as well. Let's go through the checklist that Guntrip came up with. He said that there were 9 characteristics of the schizoid personality: introversion, withdrawnness, narcissism, self-sufficiency, a sense of superiority, loss of affect, loneliness, depersonalisation, and regression. So you're always crashing in those same 9 cars. So let's go into each of those in one by one. Guntrip described introversion, number 1. Guntrip described the schizoid inner world thus: by the very meaning of the term, the schizoid is described as cut off from the world of outer reality in an emotional sense. All this libidinal desire and striving is directed inward toward internal objects, and he lives an intense inner life, often revealed in an astonishing wealth of richness of fantasy and imaginative life, wherever that becomes accessible to observation. But mostly it's in secret and hidden away. He's so cut off from outer reality as to experience it as dangerous. Well, it's a natural human response to turn away from danger towards sources of safety. So the schizoid individual is mainly concerned with avoiding danger, like motorbikes, and ensuring safety. And that's when I think of the Franz Kafka story, which perhaps defines this state of mind, which is a late short story. He wrote it just before he died of tuberculosis, and it's called The Burrow, Der Bau in German, and Bau is also a building in German. So it's about this little creature who's a mole, and he's built a kind of intensely complicated set of fortifications inside the ground, under the ground, with an entrance, a sort of fake entrance with just a rock greeting it, and then the real entrance, and then lots of tunnels where he keeps various things, his food. He's a predator too. He's prey and a predator. He's in the middle of the food chain, so he has enemies who want to kill him, and there is one particular enemy which is making its way always towards him, and he's doing his best to evade. But Dora Diamond, who was his last lover, who he lived with in Prague and Berlin, I'm not sure, in Berlin I think, she actually destroyed a version of this story in which the mole is confronted with his enemy at the end and fights his enemy and is destroyed by him. Some people say the enemy is tuberculosis, which Kafka was fighting at the time. It's a personification of being sick with a fatal disease. But it's also just a fantastic image for this sense of having to seek refuge, the ultimate refuge, from a world which you see as dangerous. Number 2, Harry Guntrip, withdrawnness. It means detachment from the outer world, or the other side of introversion. Only a small portion of schizoid individuals present with a clear and obvious timidity, reluctance, or avoidance of the external world and interpersonal relationships. Many fundamentally schizoid people present with an engaging, interactive personality style. So don't be fooled. Such a person can appear to be available, interested, engaged, and involved in interacting with others, but he or she may in reality be emotionally withdrawn and sequestered in a safe place in an internal world. Just a little note, a side note here. This is very British as well. The British are supposedly, famously, at least the old British, the post-war British, David Bowie's parents or whatever, sort of meant to be emotionally very cloistered, stiff upper lip, never really show anything, talk about the weather, conceal their true feelings, mustn't grumble, all that stuff. It's a kind of a very socialized split between the internal and external, internal feelings and external behavior. So never feel you can really get close to a British person because they're faking it essentially. Another side note is that a lot of this schizoid stuff actually is based on what I talked about yesterday briefly, the object relations school of psychoanalysis, which starts with Melanie Klein, who is a Freudian in Vienna, pretty much synchronous with Freud. And she concentrates on the psychoanalysis of children, which Freud didn't think was possible because children were not articulate and couldn't talk. But she made children play with toys and tried to observe their essential fantasy structures and what they were trying to say with them. And also she started developing this school, which is now called Object Relations, which is about relationships with not just the breasts. The breasts are, to her, certainly the most important objects, and feeding how you relate to the world, to your desires, to your needs, and what happens if they're not fulfilled. The kind of rage, the impotent rage children feel if they're not fed in time, or feel that they are being neglected or even punished by their parents. But also this got developed in Britain. Very interestingly, it became a British actually the only really British school of psychoanalysis, and it involved people like Ronald Fairbairn, Donald Winnicott, Harry Guntrip. Even R.D. Laing, to some extent, was influenced by it. He wrote famously The Divided Self in the 1960s, which was a huge bestseller, and it was about schizoid, what he called double binds. That was his particular contribution, the idea that there was a schizogenic family who would actually drive you crazy by imposing contradictory demands. You must always tell the truth, but you mustn't be a clipe. That's a typical double bind. Tell the truth in the right context, and we can't really define what that context might be. But it's interesting that, in a sense, there's a kind of a care of attention from cradle to grave to the baby boomer generation, and they have a particular relationship with the dynamics of psychoanalysis as a movement, which sprung up at the end of the 19th century but was really only getting into its stride in the mid-20th century. So it's very interesting that a school of psychiatry would come along which is looking at babies just at the time when the baby boomers are booming. People in David Bowie's generation, born just after the end of the Second World War, got lots of attention. I was brought up according to the handbook of a certain Dr. Spock, not Mr. Spock, but Dr. Spock, Baby Care, a best-selling baby care book which my mother read, and kind of, don't get angry if your child is having a tantrum. Sort of give your child a little bit more his head, or that kind of thing. I haven't read Dr. Spock, but I think it's sort of a permissive childcare manual. And Donald Winnicott also did he did 600 radio broadcasts about how to bring up your baby, not using psychoanalytical language, just sort of saying, stay calm when your baby is having a tantrum and this kind of thing. Harry Guntrip doesn't specifically talk so much about children, but he's drawing on the same object relations psychoanalysis, which is all about the ages between about 1.5 and 3.5, when the child starts to develop a distinct personality and a modus operandi with relation to the mother, especially the mother being the most important object. An object can be a person, usually like a caregiver or a parent, a nanny. This is another thing about British emotional life, is that often British people, especially from the bourgeois class, my own class, were brought up by nannies. I was brought up by au pair girls as well as my mother. I was breastfed, then au pair girls came in, and they were always changing, sort of almost a promiscuity of caregiving. And then I was sent to boarding school at the age of 10 for 3 years, which kind of messed me up, but taught me a lot of important lessons. And it was very formative on who I am now. If there are these schizoid rifts in my emotional life, it's partly because of that, but also I think it's endemic in me. But I just wanted to say, it's sort of interesting that the baby boomers got all this attention to babies when they were babies, and then, when they're old men, they're getting lots of attention from a sort of geriatric rock press which treats them, despite being old, as young, as if they were still in their prime, because rock and roll has the same kind of contours as psychoanalysis, that we are now at a certain distance from the rock revolution, which starts in the 1950s. And if you see psychoanalysis starting about the beginning of the 20th century, that was, like Harry Guntrip died in 1975. Those people, the rock stars of psychoanalysis, were dying at about the same distance from the beginning of psychoanalysis as the actual rock stars are now. So, I don't know, just throwing that out there, man. So we've got introversion, we've got withdrawnness, narcissism. Okay, well, we're apparently living under the thumb of the most narcissistic person who's ever held high office in the US anyway. And let's see what Guntrip says about it. He defines narcissism as a characteristic that arises out of the predominantly interior life the schizoid lives. His love objects are all inside him, and moreover he's greatly identified with them. Another little side note here, object relations basically says, and this is I think a bit of a divide between Melanie Klein and Winnicott and the later British object relations school. The British object relations analysts say that memory suffices for good objects. Like if you had basically a good relationship with your parents, and Melanie Klein was very big on this thing of ambivalence. If you can learn that parents don't always give you what you want, and that's okay, that's normal, that's human. They are human beings with needs as well, and worries and concerns as well. The healthy, well-adjusted child realizes that and is able to deal with ambivalence. It's the unhealthy child who has a bad experience and fixates on that, who then turns the parent, the object, into a bad object, which is then internalized. And then there's a lifelong relationship with this bad object, which is the person who could have given you what you want, but didn't, left you, abandoned you, at least in your perception, died. If they're a lover, split up with you, never talk to you again. All this sense of abandonment is very important for the bad object that you have internalized and that you are relating to all your life. So narcissism, the question is whether the intense inner life of the schizoid, it sounds pretty good so far, that he's first of all, you're not a depressive when you're a schizoid. Depression is a different thing. Depression is a desire for relationship. The schizoid position is much more a kind of just a withdrawal, a feeling that it's all fucked, you can't actually have a successful relationship with the world or with people in the world, with lovers, with parents. So you withdraw, you really sort of give up, and a great stillness descends on your life. You close the blinds. So, back to narcissism. Whether the intense inner life of the schizoid, he might become a great artist, he might become Marcel Proust in his cork-lined room. It sounds, there are mixed blessings here. A desire for hungry incorporation of external objects or due to withdrawal from the outer to a presumed safer inner world. So we don't know. It could be a bit more like the depressive position, the desire for hungry incorporation. The depressive thing, though, is that you then instantly feel guilty. If you desire someone too much, you almost feel that your desire will destroy them, and then you turn that aggression against yourself, and you destroy yourself instead. That's the basic essential, the cycloid pattern. The schizoid doesn't feel that. He's excited by the idea of making contact with this other he's hungry for this other who will be able to fulfill his needs. Because the schizoid's love objects are internal, they find safety without connecting and attaching to objects in the real world. So narcissism is basically turning all your affect inward to yourself and loving yourself. And it's not so bad, don't knock it. It's sex with someone I love, as Woody Allen says. Self-sufficiency, Guntrip observed that a sense of superiority accompanies self-sufficiency. One has no need of other people, they can be dispensed with. There often goes with it a feeling of being different from other people. The sense of superiority of the schizoid has nothing to do with the grandiose self of the narcissistic disorder. It does not find expression in the schizoid through the need to devaluate or annihilate others. That's important. I think Trump is a manipulative, exploitative narcissist who does want to destroy his enemies. The moment someone crosses him, they have to be dead meat. He will see them in court, even if it is the court who crosses him. See you in court, Judge. Whereas I've actually ticked the boxes on some of these quizzes about are you a narcissist, and where I always score low to 0 is in this exploitative, manipulative, power-crazed side. I don't really have that at all. I do have a lot of all the other stuff about narcissism. Self-sufficiency. So yes, you don't really need to be power-crazy to confirm, because you have this grandiose sense that seems totally self-sufficient. A young schizoid man said, if I'm superior to others, if I'm above others, then I do not need others. When I say that I'm above others, it doesn't mean that I feel better than them. It means that I'm at a distance from them, a safe distance. Important. It's a feeling of security rather than superiority. The next one is loss of affect. So emotion, affect, emotion. This is inevitable as the tremendous investment made in the self interferes with the desire and ability to be empathetic and sensitive towards another person's experience. People might become cynical, callous, or even cruel. and the patient doesn't seem to be aware how his or her comments and actions affect and hurt other people. This loss of feeling, compassion, is more frequently manifest within the patient as a genuine confusion, a sense of something missing in his or her emotional life. The next one in Guntrip's list is loneliness. The preceding characteristics all result in loneliness, an inescapable result of schizoid introversion and abolition of external relationships. There's an intense longing for friendship and love which repeatedly breaks through. Loneliness in the midst of a crowd is the experience of the schizoids cut off from effective rapport. So there's this caricature of the schizoid as uncaring and cold, but actually most people who become patients anyway express their longing for friendship and love. So that longing might not break through except in fantasy, and the therapist may be kept out of that for quite a long time. So there are some schizoids who don't seek treatment. I actually made, when I was feeling this stuff and reading Guntrip, I made an appointment at the Student Health Service to talk with a therapist, and then I cancelled it. And then I spoke to my downstairs neighbour, this old lady who was a Freudian psychoanalyst, and she had known Harry Guntrip personally, and she said, "I think you probably just want someone to discuss these things with. You're just interested in it intellectually. I don't think you're someone who should." She refused to accept me as a patient for analysis. I wanted the full thing, the Freudian analysis, which is an elaborate, possibly never-ending process. Ask Woody Allen. Actually, once about the same time when I was a teenager, we had Woody Allen's psychoanalyst's daughter staying with us in Edinburgh, and she was an artist. She was going to the art school, and she painted a portrait of me. And in the portrait, I've got two totally different sized eyes, a bit like David Bowie, like he had two totally different eyes, which become a kind of visible symbol for a schizoid personality. Different coloured, different shaped eyes. Depersonalisation is the next chapter heading. Guntrip describes depersonalisation as a loss of a sense of identity and individuality. It's a dissociative defence, often described by the schizoid patient as tuning out, turning off, the experience of separation between what you're seeing and who you feel you are, experienced most profoundly when anxieties seem overwhelming, and it's a more extreme form of the loss of affect, of feeling. That's more a chronic state. Depersonalisation is an acute defence against the more immediate experiences of overwhelming anxiety or danger. Talking of the burrow, by the way, this box that you look at every day forms part of the boundary of these videos. This is kind of my burrow. Guntrip actually describes, I'll read this bit next because this is where he describes it. Regression is the final characteristic. This is because the schizoid feels overwhelmed by the external world and you're in flight from it, both inwards and, as it were, backwards to the safety of the metaphorical womb. This is a kind of womb I sit in. It's a little dark, it's a bit muffled. I've got all my clothes and things in here, so there's not much sound reverberation. And I have computers, several laptops surround me and an iPad and stuff like that. I can read books in there. It's like a womb which I can retreat to. And I have looming at the moment, I have this European tour when I have to go out and meet people and be extroverted and perform in front of people. So this is almost like a seasonal thing of being shot out from the womb, preparing to put my mask on and to perform, to be Momus, this public persona, which I've invented once more. And there's definitely an anxiety in me just now, which you can probably pick up, about being born. I could actually stage it as a mime. Being born, I don't know, you're born sort of upside down and legs first, maybe it's a bit difficult, but I'm being forced out of my womb into the world and into confrontations with people in that messy place where things are particularly sticky right now, especially in Britain, with Brexit, which is it's the reverse of being born into the world. It's a return to a dark little closet in the case of Brexit. So regression inward speaks to the magnitude of the reliance on primitive forms of fantasy and self-containment, often of an autoerotic or even objectless nature. Well, I wouldn't say that this was an orgone accumulator, but certainly if there were anywhere in this house where autoerotic things happened, it might be in this little box, because it's kind of private as well. It's also a bit like a capsule hotel. So it's somewhere where it doesn't quite feel like a bedroom. Always feel there's something a little bit tomb-like about a bedroom, but this is not really. It's a kind of funky, sort of a little bit like an art gallery as well, but also a womb gallery. So that's the checklist, and that's, in the end, what I've generally said about Guntrip, reading Schizoid Phenomena, Object Relations in the Self, is that he said all these things which just seemed very trivial, like a schizoid will have two books open at the same time. He can't commit to just reading a single book from start to finish. And I thought, well, that's what students do anyway. That's what everybody does. The very first thing you find, actually, about Harry Guntrip in this this Wikipedia entry is that he was also a Congregationalist minister. So there is this moral dimension, and he's sort of saying that it's morally wrong in some way to be this type of personality, and it's almost like sin. It's a kind of state of sin. And I would say don't knock it if it's working for you. What you realize as you get older is that you can live with these things. Nobody is 100% happy. If you're happy with yourself and it works, don't tell my brother he's not a chicken because we need the eggs.
Open University.